Okay, welcome everybody. It is 7:30, so we're going to get started. I am Vivian New, your host tonight, and I wanted to welcome you to our talk, Treasure Hunting After the 2020 Fires by Amy Patten. But before we get to the talk, I have a few announcements. I think I do. Come on. What's going on here with my slide? Let's see. Okay, welcome everybody. It is 7:30, so we're going to get started. My slide does not want to move forward. Just a sec. Sorry about that. All right, here we go. Before we get started, I want to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the work done by the Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS lies in the homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Ama Mutsun tribal band, the Tamian Nation, and the Ramayatush Ohlone. This land was theirs for thousands of years and was taken forcibly from them. Despite 2 centuries of oppression and genocide, they still live and thrive in this area today. We acknowledge and respect them for their land stewardship, their culture, language, and humanity. The Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS hopes to learn from them and support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from historical trauma. And so for those of you who are joining us for the first time, if it is your first talk, we would really love to know how you found out about us and where you are. So if you're comfortable about doing this, please share that in chat. Doesn't matter if you're on YouTube or on Zoom, we'll see it both places. And our talks are not just the speaker and not just me. We actually have a team for every one of our talks. And tonight, I'm the host. Our QA moderator is Judy Fennerty. We have our YouTube monitor, Madeline Ramirez, and I'm also doing the technical support in the background, and of course, our speaker, Amy Patten. If you are not familiar with the California Native Plant Society, we are a nonprofit environmental organization founded in 1965. We have over 10,000 members in 35 chapters, which are spread all over California and beyond, not just the borders of our state, but also of the country, because we also include Baja California. Our chapter, the Santa Clara Valley chapter, covers Santa Clara and southern San Mateo counties. Now, our mission is to save California's native plants and their habitats by bringing together science, education, conservation, and gardening, which power the native plant movement. If you are not a member, we would love to have you join us. And if you join, in addition to just supporting all the important work that the California Native Plant Society does, you'll receive some really great benefits. You get not just one, but 2 magazines, Artemisia, which has a more scientific bent, and Flora, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous journal that talks about native plant gardening and interesting topics, and it's just wonderful. You'll also receive our Blazing Star chapter newsletter, which tells you about all the activities that our chapter is doing, as well as other local informational articles. You also get discounts at local nurseries, at local participating nurseries, and more. So if that sounds appealing to you, as I said before, we would love to have you join us, and you just go to cnps.org/join, or you can use that QR code on your screen. And we have a very busy January coming up. So next week we have, or actually, sorry, not next week, Friday, we have our first Keying with Natives meeting for quite a while, and it is an online class. This month, it's going to be covering the basics of plant morphology. So that's on Friday this week at 6:30, and you can find out the information to join it either on Meetup or on our website, cnps-scv.org. Next Friday, we have our annual Members Night and Photo Group meeting, which is going to be Plant Adventures in a Pandemic, because that's still where we are, part 2. And that is also online. We start with a social hour at 6, followed by the meeting itself at 7. And information about that is also on Meetup and our website. If you like these talks and you want to help us with them, we are having an organizational meeting next Monday, and information about that is also on our website. And then at the very beginning of February, we have, on the very first Wednesday, we have a talk on Cowscape, and I will be giving that talk. So if you want to learn how to pick plants for your garden, join us on February 2nd. And there is more about all of these activities and more on our website, cnps-scv.org and meetup.com. You can use those QR codes to get to them directly. Our chapter also has a nursery. We have an online store, which is currently closed for orders, although you can still go to it and get an idea of what we have in stock right now. We will be reopening it on February 1st. We are leaving it open for the first 2 weeks of each month. So if you want to take a look, go ahead and do that now, and then come back again on February 1st to place your orders. Once you place your order, you can either schedule a time to come by the nursery to pick it up, or if you live between Belmont and San Jose, you can get delivery depending on how much you're buying. It could be free, or you can just pay a fee to get that done. And all those proceeds benefit our chapter. So that's one of the ways that we pay for all the things that we do. And not only do we sell plants, but we also have t-shirts, books, and more. So we appreciate your purchases, and there's a lot of great stuff in the nursery. Now, if you want just a weekly message to let you know what's coming up, and you're not currently on our email list, I strongly suggest joining that CNPS-SCV news mailing list, and you can find out how to join it by going to our website, cnps-scv.org, or you could copy that long email address on the screen right now. I also wanted to make you aware about a horticultural scholarship that we established this year. The applications are due by the end of January, so you still have a bit over a week to get them in. It's for $750 for a local student who's pursuing a horticultural career with a focus on native plants. And we're almost ready to start the talk, but a little bit of housekeeping first. So please keep your microphones muted, but you can ask questions at any point during the talk by typing them into chat. We're monitoring both YouTube and Zoom, and at the end of the talk, we will be asking Amy all the questions that you type in. So please feel free to type them in at any point. And we do expect to finish around 9 o'clock. As I mentioned before, the talk is both on YouTube and Zoom, which also means it's being recorded, so you can watch it pretty much right away after the talk is over, but you can also come back and watch it at any time later on. And now I would love to introduce Amy Patten, who is a staff member with CNPS in the Rare Plant Program. She manages the Rare Plant Treasure Hunt, which is a community science effort that collects up-to-date information on rare plant populations to improve conservation and management, and it also provides botany skill training to volunteers. Amy is a longtime resident of Santa Cruz County. She's passionate about our local natural history and conservation. She got her bachelor's degree in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from UC Santa Cruz in 2009. And I really do want to put a plug in for these rare plant treasure hunts. I've been on several with Amy. She's amazing. They are so much fun, and you really, truly do learn a lot. So Amy, I'm turning it over to you now. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vivian. I will go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay, it's being a little slow. Please bear with me. Okay, there we go. Thanks everyone for joining me tonight. My name's Amy Patten, and I'm the Rare Plant Treasure Hunt Manager. And before we get started, I just wanted to raise some awareness for an issue that's important to the Amamutsan tribal band. Currently, there is a proposed mining site on some of their sacred lands, Huristack, which is located near Gilroy. So I'd like to encourage everyone to check out the website and learn more about what the chapter is doing for this campaign and donate time and money if you're able to. So as Vivian said, I manage the Rare Plant Treasure Hunt, and this is an effort to resurvey as many old records of rare plants as we can. As the decades go on, a lot of our information on rare plant records becomes out of date, And we could miss out threats and other declines happening within those populations if we don't revisit them. And a lot of the records have no location data or extremely vague locations, especially records taken before modern GPS units. So our goal is to try and do some detective work, look at maps, talk to locals, find geology we think is relevant, and try and track down where some of these records are. And while doing this, we also are always keeping an eye out for exciting finds of new rare plant populations, or visiting under-botanized areas to look for new populations. And this is a collaborative effort between professionals, community members, volunteers, chapter members, and other nonprofit partner groups. And with all this information that we collect, we hope to pass it along to land managers so that they can better protect and manage our rare plant populations. So plants can be considered rare for a number of reasons. In California, we have a lot of plants that have extremely small geographic ranges. They can have low numbers of populations. We have about 20 plants that only have one population, and that's it for the whole species. Their reproductive biology can lend to small numbers of individuals in each population, or they can be facing conservation threats throughout their range that lead to declines. And one of the functions of the Rare Plant Program at CNPS is that our rare plant botanists assess the status of each rare plant and assign a CNPS California Rare Plant rank based on how rare it is and why. So these ranks are assigned a number 1 through 4. So our rank 1 species are our most rare, that are rare, threatened, or endangered throughout their ranges anywhere they occur, and many of these species are endemic to California. Our rank 2 plants are plants that have the periphery of their ranges in the state. So they're often more common outside of the state, like Great Basin or Pacific Northwest species, but have really limited distributions within the state. And we want to be responsible for managing our resources within California. So that's why we still consider them rare. Rank 3 species are taxa that we need more information about, either taxonomically or on geography and distribution. So if you are interested in a grad school project, I'd encourage you to check out rank 3 plants for some ideas for projects. And rank 4 are watch list plants that have a limited distribution and might be eligible to be relisted as rank 1 if they experience declines. And along with the rare plant rank, we also assign a threat rank of 1 through 3, with 1 being our most seriously threatened taxa and 3 being our least threatened. So throughout the talk, you'll see these listings of the rare plant rank, like 1B1. So tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about the burn areas of the CZU Lightning Complex and SCU Lightning Complex fires. And in August of 2020, an unusual, unprecedented for this area and season, lightning storm broke out over the Bay Area and the Central Coast. And it was unusually hot and dry, even for August at that time. And these lightning strikes started many wildfires that coalesced into the 2 complex fires. And the CZU Lightning Complex burned nearly 90,000 acres in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was immensely damaging to people's homes and businesses and structures, and caused 1 fatality. Also massively impacted Big Basin State Park and many other beloved public lands. The SCU Lightning Complex fire covered a much wider area of almost 400,000 acres across the Bay Area in the Diablo range. However, this fire took place in much more remote areas and overall had less impacts to human life. And because of factors like the intensity and severity being a little different and different habitat types, these fires had different impacts on the plant communities. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I think with fire, there's sometimes a tendency to paint it as being all good or all bad. Um, clearly these fires have big impact on people's lives, and we've lost many places that were special to us, our favorite places to camp, places where we had memories with friends, our favorite places to hike and botanize, are destroyed or transformed or inaccessible. Um, it's it's really hard and it's difficult. However, fire effects are very nuanced, and often due to our topography in California being steep and rugged, they can take place as more of a mosaic or patchwork. So we can't always paint the effects of one fire under a single brush stroke. The good news is that a lot of our native plant species have evolved with fire as a part of their natural history. So many species benefit from fire. Their life history can even depend on fire, like our fire following species that we're going to learn a little bit more about tonight. And plants can respond by either having increased reseeding with extra germination following fires, or with resprouting from species that have underground energy stored in bulbs and tubers and burls. So great example is our lilies. These beautiful calcordis were resprouting in massive numbers after the fire. They're geophytes, so they have an underground bulb. And normally lilies might occasionally skip a year or a couple of years of blooming. But after a fire, they tend to take advantage of these prime conditions to disperse and germinate seeds. And so they all bloom at once. And we're often treated to these beautiful botanical displays and super blooms, even in some cases. And with fire, there's a potential to find rare plants that haven't been seen in a long time. A lot of our rare plants are fire followers, like bush mallows and genus Malgathamnus. So their seeds can last, we've recorded 100 years or more, pretty amazing. And the seeds have the ability to lie dormant in the seed bank until heat and smoke from the fire activate germination. So it was really important to me to get out into these burn areas to document some of the rare plants that hadn't been seen in decades. So my goal with this 2021 field season was to visit some of these known rare plant locations, look at historic sites that hadn't been seen in a while, and hopefully locate some new rare plant populations. And just to add a little bit about myself, I've lived in Santa Cruz since 2005, and I volunteer at Rancho del Oso in Big Basin. So, these fires were really personal to me. A lot of places where I had worked and spent a lot of time were really destroyed and damaged by these fires. So I was really invested in doing this work. And I found that throughout doing these surveys, seeing some of the regrowth and the beautiful flower displays was really joyful and healing. And so I just wanted to share tonight some of my favorite memories and experiences and some of the highlights of the field season, along with some cool rare plant finds. And before I get started, wanted to mention I'm not the only person doing cool rare plant and doing cool plant surveys, plant work in the burn areas. Our vegetation staff did massive survey efforts in both burn areas, along with students and interns and volunteers from UCSC and other local colleges and state parks and other agency partners. So lots of other cool stuff going on in the burn area besides my rare plant surveys. So to start out, I'm going to take you on a tour to some field sites in the SCU Lightning Complex fire area. So this burn was in the Diablo range, or the mountains east of San Jose. As you look up from downtown San Jose or wherever you are, almost any location, you can see the domes of Lick Observatory up on the summit of Mount Hamilton. And what's really amazing is you can start out in, as urban as it gets in San Jose and drive for 20 or 30 minutes, and it feels like you've gone back in time to another century. So as you go up the highway towards the observatory, the houses and businesses start to drop off and things turn to cow pastures and rolling oak hillsides. It's really amazing, and it's crazy how remote some of these areas are for being so close to major metro areas. And the Diablo Range is really cool because the topography is extremely rugged, leading to a lot of isolated populations of plants and animals. And there's a lot of unique geology in the Franciscan melange. So the Franciscan soils have some unusual rock types, such as serpentine, that have special properties that a lot of rare plants specialize on. So because of that, this part of the Diablos has a lot of endemic plants found only in the Diablo Range or even only in the Mount Hamilton area. And the theme you'll notice throughout these surveys is rock outcrops. So pretty much all of them specialize on rock and talus from Franciscan Formation soils. So we'll be talking rocks quite a bit. So to start out the field season, in April, I was able to visit the San Antonio Valley Preserve with a few chapter members. As you might see from the photos, this area burned, but it was at a really low intensity. So minimal tree damage, some fire scars on the oaks, but overall low intensity and healthy burn that treated us to some really nice botanical displays. One of our goals was seeing the San Benito pentakita, which is that kind of pathetic looking aster. Don't worry, it's supposed to look like that. They have really nice disc flowers, but they only have a couple of ray flowers. And they look kind of sad, but we were happy to find two populations. They had somewhat reduced numbers, probably because of the drought year. But it was great to refine them, and also saw some other great flowers like purple mouse ears and meadow foam growing in all of the depressions and wet areas. I did a lot of work at Lick Observatory at the summit of Mount Hamilton. This is a really cool and interesting place. It's our highest peak in the Bay Area, and because of that has some unusual climate, like it often holds snow for quite a bit of the winter compared to our other Bay Area peaks, and has a lot of that Franciscan Formation soil too. So at the observatory grounds, there's a number of Diablo Range endemics and even Lomatium observatorium, which is named because it's mostly known from right beneath the domes of the observatory. And it probably has a wider range in the Diablos, but this area also has a lot of private land. So there's not very many sites that are accessible to survey. So I was able to apply for a research permit and worked with the observatory staff to do a number of surveys. And I had first come to the observatory in 2019 to seed bank the Lomatium Observatorium. CNPS is part of California Plant Rescue, which is an effort to seed bank all of our rare flora so they're secured in case something happens to the populations in the wild. We have a backup of the genetic material to help populations be augmented or recover. So one of my goals was to seed bank a couple of species that occurred at the observatory. So I was lucky enough to team up with one of the astronomers, Eleanor Gates, who's also an excellent botanist and naturalist. And she's spent a lot of time making observations around the observatory grounds. And so she led me to a few rare plant populations that had not been documented in a long time. The Mount Diablo hadn't been documented since 1931. and the rock sanicle hadn't been documented since the late 80s. So we were able to collect up-to-date information on those plants and seed banked all 3 of these species. So the fire got really close to the observatory. It damaged some of the buildings, but fortunately the observatory domes and all of the historic structures were saved by CAL FIRE. And it had burned fairly intense around the summit of Mount Hamilton. So I was curious to see how some of these rare plant populations had fared. And one plant I was particularly interested in is Leptocynne hamiltoni, which is a small nondescript aster that grows on talus slopes. And it's only found in the Diablos from about Sunol east over towards Del Puerto Canyon in the Hamilton Range. And most of the sites that it occurs on are on private land or are on BLM lands that are no longer accessible. So there's very few places that you could visit and actually see the Leptocynne. So it was last documented at the observatory in the 80s, and a rare plant treasure hunt had looked for it and missed it a few years ago. And I looked for it in 2019 and also not seen it. But since it lives on these talus slopes that are often can be inundated with invasives that make the habitat less suitable, I was hoping that the fire had cleared some space and maybe they could get a foothold again. And we lucked out and we actually refound the population. So we were up at the top of this talus slope and we saw a splash of yellow way down the hill. And we thought it was probably a more common species, but figured we would go down and check it out anyways. And we were able to refine the population. And as you can see from the middle photos, some of the plants are growing straight out of the ashy ground. So now that we know where the population is again, we'll be able to monitor it and keep an eye on it in the future. Another one of my favorite finds from the season was this unusually colored Calochortus venustus. I was on a rock outcrop looking for the rock sanicle and gasped out loud when I saw this flower. Calochortus venustus is really variable. In Southern California, they can be all sorts of shades of pink and red and purple and orange. But in Northern California, they're typically just white, although the white morphs are still very beautiful and have a lot of variation. So it was really special to see this unusually colored flower on this rock outcrop that had burnt recently. And so hopefully it'll keep blooming. You can see it again in future years. I also did a lot of visits to Henrico State Park, including with the help from the chapter and Mason Highland, one of the environmental scientists from State Parks, and Zach Harlow from Blue Oak Ranch Reserve. So one of the areas we visited is the Red Creek drainage, which is at the very northern end of Henrico, just south of San Antonio Valley. And the valley floor is very beautiful and shaded and lush. And then rising above it is these hills covered in rock outcrops and really harsh and dense chaparral. So we had a goal of refinding this population of Phacelia phaceolioides that hadn't been seen since 1987. And the record is pretty vague and just said that it was on these slopes on rock outcrops, and that was all we knew. So from the ground, the fire had cleared some brush out of the way so we could see a few outcrops, but they were about 600 or 1,000 feet up the hill. So we decided to start bushwhacking and head up there. And it was on an unusually hot day. So we toiled up to the first rock outcrop and we found some Santa Clara thorn mint, which is exciting because that's rank 4 rare plant, that spiky guy in the lower picture. But we didn't see any Phacelia. So we saw another rock outcrop even further away on a different peak. And so did some pretty intense bushwhacking And we got there, and believe it or not, Mason spotted the Phacelia. It's only about 3 inches tall and is pretty plain and nondescript, but we refound the population against all odds. And it was in perfect condition to make another conservation seed bank collection. So that was a really exciting population to refind. A lot of the chaparral slopes in Co burned really hot. Some of them look pretty barren and desolate, but chaparral has evolved to burn pretty high intensity, hot temperatures. And it's already started to rebound, and some really interesting species are coming up. Lots of calistegia, lots of mara, wild cucumber, tons of whispering bells, and saw the rare Calandrinia breweri absolutely everywhere on kind of these burn slopes. So this is really similar to red maids, our usual common one we're used to seeing around everywhere, but the flowers are paler pink and often have some faint striping. And they grow in these little rosettes that can be anywhere from a few inches to a few feet wide. So I saw this one all over both SCU and CZU burn areas. Another rare plant that had a really good year despite the drought was the serpentine leptosiphon, which I saw all over Mount Hamilton and Henry Co. And I often saw it growing with one of my favorite flowers, Lucia rediviva, bitter root. So all over Co, I'd see these pink paint splashes that look like watercolors. And those are just blankets of the leptosiphon. And over, I found them growing on these Franciscan talus fields with Wright's buckwheat and Lucia. So that was a cool little weird vegetation community you saw all over Co. And did a few visits to the Dowdy entrance at the southern end of Co near Casa de Fruta. So that area burned also at a pretty low intensity and was pretty patchy. So in that area, not really getting the bare slopes like I was seeing at the middle and northern ends of the park. So I did one visit end of April, beginning of May, and I had wanted to re-find a record of Campanula exigua, which hadn't been seen since the late 80s. And the description of the site was pretty good, but there's a lot of invasives, and I checked it and didn't see the plant, but made plans with some Santa Clara Valley chapter members and my friend Kenichi to come back a few weeks later. So we returned. And we got treated to a few late season wildflowers, saw some calochortus and milkweed. We did a hike up to this serpentine outcrop to look for Streptanthus glandulosus, which on some of the serpentine and Franciscan soils get this really beautiful dark color, so purple they're almost black. So we took some photos and collected some specimens since it's kind of an unusual color seen in some parts of the range in the Diablos. And then I figured we'd stop by the Campanula site on the way out, and I wasn't very optimistic since I'd failed on my first attempt. And fortunately had Kenichi with us because I was still organizing my data sheets and putting stuff in my backpack when he rediscovered the population before I even left the car. So we were really happy to see that it actually covered a little bit wider of an extent than the original record and had higher numbers. So it was great finding them after it hadn't been seen since I think about 1987. And just wanted to point out too, this area did burn, also pretty low intensity, but unfortunately, yeah, a lot of weeds were coming back in this area, even on the rock outcrops where generally they're less invaded by invasives. So was still happy to find the population despite these conditions. Also did a lot of botanizing at Blue Oak Ranch Reserve. This is a UC reserve that's on the western slopes of Mount Hamilton. And it's beautiful rolling oak woodland, but there's not a ton of rare plants records recorded from the reserve. And so the eastern half burned in 2020, but it burned at a very low intensity. So fortunately, there wasn't too much death of the oak trees or other plant species. And so we were able to record two new rare plant records for the reserve, found the Calandrinia breweri and serpentine leptosiphon on some Franciscan talus. And here's a photo of the reserve, just showing how well it's bounced back since the fire. Okay, now we are going to head to the Santa Cruz Mountains to the CZU Lightning Complex fire. So most of the work that I did in this area was in Big Basin Redwoods State Park, including Rancho del Oso, the coastal portion of the park. Also did some surveys in Bonnie Dune, which is a rural community north of UC Santa Cruz that was hit extremely hard by the fires with many home losses, and Butano State Park up by Pescadero. So kind of one of the main differences between the two fires is that where the SCU complex burned in forests, it was often at lower intensity in oaks and pines. And so there's pretty high survival of mature trees. Unfortunately, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, the fire burned very hot and intense in a lot of closed canopy forest. Unfortunately, Douglas fir trees are not very well adapted to fire. Their strategy with fires is to avoid and become extirpated from the area, and they'll recolonize decades later from neighboring populations. So unfortunately, I think some of the Douglas fir forests could experience type conversion, where it becomes scrub or chaparral instead of returning to forest. Redwoods were hit pretty hard, but I was really happy to see that there seemed to be pretty good survival and a lot of regrowth. Redwood strategies for dealing with fire is to protect adult trees with their thick bark that helps insulate the core of the tree. And after a fire, they start resprouting immediately. So they have a burl at the base of the tree that has a lot of energy stored up, and they shoot out new growth through basal resprouting out of the burl. And they can also have epicormic growth, where leaves sprout out of the trunks and branches of the tree and gives them kind of a pipe cleaner like kind of look to them. So it was just really great seeing kind of all of this new growth happening despite the destruction from the fires. So I did these surveys with Dylan Neubauer, who's one of our top botanists in Santa Cruz County. And she collected hundreds and hundreds of plant specimen vouchers from the burn area, which will be really important records for studying fire recovery in the future. So one of the areas we were most interested in was the northern end of the park around China Grade and the Skyline to the Sea trail. And this area burned pretty hot and intense because it was more of a chaparral and pine habitat, both habitat types that burn hot. But we were also fortunate enough to see some really cool finds in the area. One of my favorite fire followers that I saw all over Big Basin and Bonnie Dune is the sweet scented Phacelia. And true to its name, it smells amazing. I'd say the scent is reminiscent of honey and mint. So it might not stick around for long. A lot of our fire followers might only be around for a few years. There's some like fire poppy that are really only present for a year or two after a fire. Some other areas where I'd seen Phacelia suaveolens It was like massive fields one year after, and then about half as many the next year, about half as many the year after. So I hope these guys stick around, but we might have kind of a short time to experience them in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Yerba Santa is another one that kind of really benefited from the fire. They have a lot of energy stored in their underground roots. So when the above ground vegetation is damaged by a fire, it sends out a signal to start resprouting immediately. So Yerba Santa was everywhere. Manzanitas are also generally set up well to recover from fires. They are either burl sprouters, where they resprout from the base of the trunk, or they're seed sprouters, where they experienced lots of increased germination after the fire. So didn't see as many of the seedlings going this year, but I'm optimistic, or last year, but I'm optimistic after some of this year's rain, we could get more seedlings coming up in 2022. Calistegia I was not expecting to see so much of this. It was like a monoculture in some areas, just covering nearly every inch of ground and climbing up every single tree. So luckily this is the native one. Overall too, I would say I was pleasantly surprised in general to see mostly natives coming up in most areas. With the drought conditions, I was a bit worried that everywhere I go would be just invasives coming back, but was pleasantly surprised to see mostly natives during my surveys. So lots of Calandrinia breweri growing in those rosettes. Here's Dylan for scale. This rosette is about 4 feet wide. And so they were all over Big Basin, and it'll be exciting to see how long they stick around for. I looked at the seeds. Seeds are really amazing. They're absolutely massive compared to the size of the flower. And they're so shiny and hard. I initially thought they were beetles in the soil until I got down and looked closer. So it's easy to see why it's a good fire follower, because those seeds are so robust. They really hold up in the seed bank. And had good displays of other flowers. Clammy clover was one that did pretty well after the fires, and kind of exhibited some extra large growth forms. Lots of chaparral, pea blooming, and also lots of scutellaria. There's a few species that are also fire followers. Bush poppy is one of my other favorite fire followers. They occur in low numbers at chaparral habitats, but they really need heat and smoke from fires for their seeds to germinate. So after the fires, they're one of the main species to come back. So saw tons of them in both burn areas, and they bloom for many months out of the years. So it really just lifts your spirits to see beautiful yellow flowers, even when the rest of the burn area can look pretty bleak. Santa Cruz County also has a special soil type, the Zyanti sand hills, which are ancient marine beds that have a lot of endemic plants and wildlife on them. So we have 4 endemic plant species found nowhere else in the world besides these sand hills. And one of those species is the Ben Lomond spine flower. And so we went looking for the population in Big Basin, and we were happy to re-find it. And when we collected the data, we were able to map it with better GPS coordinates. And so despite having some invasive grasses to wrestle with, which the spine flower is not a fan of, the population was doing really well here. There's also fire following moss. So in wet areas, we'd see thick carpets of bonfire moss. And Dylan found a new population of a rank 4 rare plant, Hickman's popcorn flower. And just a few other wildflowers like goldfields and wine cups were around. Our most exciting find from Big Basin was Malacothamnus arcuatus. Like I mentioned earlier, Malacothamnus are fire followers. And so this was known from a really old, undated record The record was published in 1941, but it was probably observed sometime between the last time Big Basin burned in 1906 and 1941 when it was published. And the record only said they were in the hills north of Big Basin, and that's it. So we didn't have any kind of exact location to go on, but suspected that the habitat was good in that China grade skyline to the sea area. So on one of our first surveys, Dylan found a population with about 50 plants that were all pretty small and not flowering, but we were really excited to re-find them. And then on a follow-up survey, we found an even bigger population with hundreds and hundreds of Malacathamnus covering an entire meadow. And many of them were blooming, and it was quite a sight to see. And we were able to collect some tissue for Kier Morse, who is a student and taxonomist at California Botanic Garden, who is working on the phylogeny of Malacathamnus. So in addition to our fire followers work, we are also able to share some important data with him. Another amazing Santa Cruz Mountains endemic is the Santa Cruz cypress. It's only found on sandy soils in the Bonnie Dune area and over near Butano State Park. And they're another species that requires fire as part of their life history. Their cones are serotinous, meaning they need heat to open up the cones and release the seeds. So as the trees grow, their cones are tightly fused together. And although they do open up a little bit with age, they don't drop that many seeds as they only open a little bit. When fire comes through, they've evolved to have really high mortality with almost every adult tree not surviving the fire. But then it's perfect conditions for seedlings to germinate. So the heat from the fire opens up the cones, thousands of seeds drop. There's reduced competition with the newly opened forest floor, and seedlings will germinate, and it will prolong the life of the Santa Cruz cypress stand for decades to come. So I photographed these cones that were opened up to reveal the seeds at the end of 2020 in Bonnie Dune. And then I returned about a year later, and we found a seedling that had germinated under the cones. So we were worried with the drought conditions that there might be very low germination and survival of seedlings. But fortunately, they are hanging in there. So there is still some growth and germination happening in these areas that burned. So one of our next steps will be to kind of evaluate seedling survival in the cypress populations and keep an eye on them. And another tree with a similar life history is the Monterey pine. And Monterey pines are one of the most widely cultivated trees in the entire world for timber industry and ornamentation, but they're actually very rare in the wild. So they only have 3 native stands in California and 2 in Baja. And our northernmost stand, which is in Rancho del Oso and Big Basin and Año Nuevo, was really heavily affected by the fires. But similar to the cypress, their cones are serotinous, so open up, distribute tons of seeds, lots of germination with the seedlings, but there is pretty high mortality from the adult trees. So in this area, the fire was very hot and intense, and it was a crown fire that reached the crowns of the trees. So the adult tree survival is probably something like, 25 to 50%. But we are seeing some germination, although it seems to vary kind of by what area it's like what part of the slope they're in. There's some different effects on topography. So this will be another area that we are going to follow up on and see how the seedlings are doing. And so this forest used to have brambles that were about 5 or 6 feet tall and was absolutely impenetrable. But now the understory is cleared. Bracken ferns are another one that resprout very quickly after a fire. So there's kind of this lush carpet of bracken ferns coming up along with the seedlings. In this area, we also had a number of challenges with field work. If you are wondering why Big Basin is still closed, here are some photos of the conditions on the trails. When the trees burn really hot, they often leave behind these cavities where the roots burn out and you can fall into those holes, or if you walk too close to them, they cave in. And you can get stuck, and many down trees and landslides in this area prevented us from being able to navigate the former trails. So we wanted to look for 2 populations of rare plants that were on the Skyline to the Sea bypass trail in Rancho del Oso, Silene veracunda, and Collinsia multicolor. And the Silene kind of uses bare talus slopes and cliffs. And the Collinsia grows on the side of the trail. And so we were not sure if they were going to still be present given all of the disturbances following the fire. So the regular ways to the trail were blocked by massive trees, and we had to navigate weeds as tall as we were and climb around this root ball of this absolutely massive tree and go over many down trees. And when we reached the area where the plants were, there's a number of kind of these landslides, but we were able to relocate both populations. And it's possible that these disturbances could open up some new habitat for them. So although it looks pretty rough right now, I'm optimistic we could see some more expansion of those populations in the future if we're able to access the area again. Pretty crazy conditions for surveying, and some perks is there's some nice wildflowers up there to make up for our arduous day in the field. And compared to Big Basin, Butano State Park experienced a really low intensity burn that was very healthy and understory clearing. And I'm really excited to see some displays of redwood forest wildflowers that will be coming up soon in this park. And Stachy's Bulata is one that did really well after the fires. Also saw lots of Mara or manroot, and of course, tons and tons of poison oak. And a few other cool observations from the burn areas is we saw several fasciated plants. So fasciation is when the apical meristem of the plant that's responsible for growth is damaged. So instead of growing up and out, they grow out extra wide and have really funky stem and flower shapes. So we saw this fasciated bush poppy and Bonnie Doon. In the middle is Fremont's death camas and an extra wide huckleberry. And there's many things that cause fasciation. It can be genetic mutation, can be pests, insects, parasites, or physical damage to the apical meristem. So although it's not like a documented pattern with fire, you can imagine with stress and kind of some of the different chemical inputs from smoke and stuff like that, really weird conditions for the plants that survived the fires to be dealing with. So it was interesting to see some of this in a few different places. And one of the benefits of fire is that it deposits a lot of nutrients in the soil. So between decreased competition and extra nutrients, we saw a lot of extra large plants. So on the left is the leaves of the Fremont's death camas, looking about 3 or 4 times too big. Extra tall and weird soaproot. That yerba santa leaf is like almost a foot long, and an extra large clammy clover leaf. So it was fun seeing some of these weird growth forms we don't usually see. And plants are not the only fire followers. Some parts of California, we have fire following birds and insects. And in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we have a lot of fire following fungus. So it was really fun last winter getting to document some of the cool fungus that was coming up. And these are all species that grow on burn wood or on ash and charred soil. So keep an eye out if you're in burn areas this time of year. You could still see some of these cool fungus. Pyronema, the one in the middle, is my favorite. It looks like fluorescent neon orange spray paint. It's unnaturally bright, really cool stuff. So in addition to the Rare Plant Treasure Hunt, we have another community science project, the 2020 Fire Followers. So this is a project to document biodiversity in the burn areas from the 2020 fires. So please check out the website for Fire Followers and you can learn more about how to get involved. There's a project on iNaturalist that we are collecting data in. It's really easy to join and add data to the project. And there's lots of cool challenges and competitions with this project to keep you engaged. And we're going to continue collecting data in these 2020 burn areas, but soon we'll be adding burn areas from 2021 fires as well. And just wanted to let everyone know that most of these areas I talked about are not open to the public. So CNPS staff apply for research permits and arrange for special access to these burn areas. As you saw from some of my photos, a lot of these areas are really not safe or fun. So if you're interested in visiting burn areas, please check out the website for the park you're planning to go to see if it's closed or not. In general, Henry Coe, I think, is all open to the fire. So SCU Complex Fire is easier to visit. Most of Big Basin is still closed and awaiting more trail work and tree removal. So just wanted to let everyone know that you should know before you go, before visiting burn areas. You can also check out the Fire Followers website for some information on safety and access if you do want to visit burn areas. And there's a list on that page of some burn areas that are open to the public. Just wanted to thank a few folks that helped me with this presentation and helped with surveys and collecting data. And that's it. I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Well, thanks, Amy. That was great. Just the right mix of the two different locations and everything you were trying to do last year. So we have a few questions. I bet some more will come in as we go along. But so let's see. So was the fire in Blue Oak Ranch in San Jose foothills, was that considered low intensity or high?
That was low intensity. So burned at a lower heat. A lot of things can affect the intensity of the fire. Can be the topography of the landscape, if the fire is going uphill versus downhill, moisture, either from canopy or from groundwater. So yeah, lots of factors influencing, including the weather. If there's winds, that can move fires a lot faster. And what time of day it is, fires burn less intense at night and a lot more intense during the day. And there's a heat wave, so that kind of kicked up the intensity for these two fires. But yeah, definitely over across the two areas was really a mosaic of different effects.
Have you heard anything about Big Basin opening up again to an extent?
Yeah, I think Fall Creek, they are hoping to open that closed portion fairly soon. Maybe this winter or spring. And there's an additional trail in Rancho Delo, so they're working to reopen soon too. But unfortunately, I think most of the park will still be closed for a couple of years. All the infrastructure for the park is gone. Almost every structure was destroyed. And still lots of hazard trees are being removed. So it's a bummer. I miss Big Basin so much. I know all of you do
A
too.
lot of people.
It's been a fun exercise in finding weird parks and public lands I hadn't been to keep myself busy. So hopefully we can still find other good places to hike.
It's great. Yeah, I know. A lot of people really miss those parks. But so we had a question back to Mount Hamilton about the peony that is legendary, maybe up there, Peony brownii, and Roger Acius asked if anybody had seen it, but it doesn't sound like, as far as I know, but nobody's seen it in a long time.
Yeah, I did not encounter it, nor did I hear of anyone encountering it. But the Hamilton Range is amazing because there's so much left to discover. And so, even though this year the field season ended up being kind of short because things really heated up by May and the drought really curtailed the field season to short window of time. But I'm optimistic now that we've had more rain, we can still see a lot of these fire followers and maybe get some species we didn't see last time.
That'd be nice. Some of the shrubs are coming back quickly, like the chamise and so forth, really getting there. So what would you be looking for this coming season? Do you have plans mapped up? Is there some kind of unicorn, any unicorns you have, any that you would love to find?
Ooh, a few. Bocara rubicundula is the Mount Day rock cress, and that's only known from one site on private land near Mount Hamilton. That's kind of my holy grail. I'm hoping I can find it on just some weird rock outcrop, but no dice yet on that. One I had really hoped to see this year that I'm optimistic could be more of next year is the Santa Cruz Mountains penstemon. It's absolutely gorgeous, bright purple, and there's some evidence it's a fire follower, but I was really hoping on seeing new populations all over Big Basin and Bonnie Doon, and I did not. But there's some evidence based on a state park's controlled burn plot. It might need 2 or 3 years after a fire to get going. So I'm hoping that we might see some more of that in future years, even though we didn't find any this year.
As last year was such a dry year too, that really had an impact. So maybe with someone else asked that as well, if there are any chances you might find something this year after the early rains.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My understanding of if you kind of have a short window where there's that perfect combination of bare soil, reduced competition, extra nutrients, and if we were to have a prolonged drought, that kind of perfect window for fire followers could be lost. But if you're able to get that rain by like the second year, you can still have that opportunity for fire followers to come up. So I'm hoping we get some more rain, and hopefully at least from these early rains, hoping some of our rare plants might benefit from that and decide to show up.
The rare plants and not so much the invasive grass and things like that.
Yeah. This message is not for invasive grass.
So we had a question about which of the rare native Scutellaria did you find?
Ooh, I will have to look at iNaturalist and tell you in a minute. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think I saw 2 species. Neither of them were rare, but don't see them around a ton. So it was just fun to see them in the burn areas.
Was that Hulsea something else that we were looking for? That
Yeah, Hulsea brevifolia is another really cool fire follower. One population was found on private land in Bonnie Doon, which is really exciting. And so that's one I'm optimistic. Again, it's not rare, but it's really gorgeous, and we should have more records of it in both Santa Cruz and Santa Clara County. So I'm hoping we can find some more of that in future surveys.
great. That's great. It's such an interesting plant. So we had a question. First of all, we have lots of thanks coming in the chat and
Yay.
congratulations also, but somebody said, makes me proud to be a CNPS member that you're going out to document these. So your membership support Amy's work out here and everybody, all the other rare plant team. So we had a question. The Calochortus seemed prolific and oversized. Did you also see any fertile areas?
Man, I kind of missed the window on the Talus fritillary in March. I'm hoping I can get some of those this year. So I saw fritillary affinis maybe only a couple of times, so didn't quite hit the fritillaria jackpot, but Calochortus was everywhere. So yeah, I was definitely happy to see a lot of the white fairy lantern and Calochortus venustus absolutely everywhere. So that was really a treat to see so many of them.
Yes, there's that doctoral student who's studying the different colors of Calochortus across the state.
Yeah, and she's
her name now.
Adriana Hernandez.
Yes.
And she's going to have a paper coming out soon too on her research.
Very beautiful, with many beautiful illustrations, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I think there's a note here that rock sanicle is Saniculus saxatilis.
Yeah, I might have misspelled it. I always spell it saxatilis, but it's saxatilis. So maybe
cool plant. So I think that's about all we have. If anybody else, Vivian or other Madeline, did you have anything that I missed particularly?
I think you got it all.
Okay.
That was an amazing presentation, Amy. Thanks.
Oh, great. Thank you guys for attending. Also wanted to say we're hopefully gonna have some rare plant treasure hunts with the chapter, working on planning those. So look for some announcements from the chapter in the next few months. I also have a mailing list on the CNPS website. I can pull it up and drop it in the chat. The mailing list has been a bit defunct throughout COVID. As you can imagine, unfortunately, I haven't been able to do very many in-person events, but we're hoping as conditions improve, we can do some socially distant, outdoor, safe events coming up. So, let's see. Let me send out that link. Okay, so here's the link to the treasure hunt, and there's a link to sign up for the mailing list on that page. And hopefully some of you can join me in the field this year.
That'll be great. Looking forward to it. So thanks so much, Jamie.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks. I'm going to be shutting it off now. So good night, everybody.